I think lobbying is a huge problem. You look at the fund, even like when you start watching some of the hearings, and then you go look and see who's behind them, what kind of monies have they gotten, and what are they protecting? Are they really working for you and I, the everyday person? The whole system's wrapped up in the power of the money. Even a lot of the patient advocacy groups or the disease groups that we think are actually representing the public, a lot of them they're getting funding from the pharmaceutical companies as well. And so they're in some ways the extension of marketing departments, right? So everybody's speaking the messages, the controlled messages that the companies or those in power want to have heard. It's not a red or blue issue, it's a purple for people. And so I think at the end of the day, that's where when you start seeing it, I'm like, because the whole system's they're all in bed with each other. And at the end of the day, like we really do need to ask the right questions, or just have an open mind and sit in the uncomfortable truth that we may not be being told everything that we thought was true.
You're about to hear a story from a widow about how her husband took his own life. And it's a really important story because his state of mind may very well have been influenced by a prescription medication. I think we're all aware of the warnings on the labels and the black boxes on things. Kim Witczak has been a champion of making sure that drug companies are held accountable and do the proper warnings for people. But having said that, we are nowhere near out of the woods. Woody Matters is her organization, launched shortly after the death of her husband, Woody Witczak, a Zoloft-induced suicide in 2003. We'll let Kim, the widow, tell you the story and what she's doing now and how you can be aware of how the drugs you're being prescribed, or maybe someone in your family is being prescribed, may not be all that they are said to be, and you may not need them. We're going to talk about all of it next. Kim Witczak, it's great to see you again. You and I both live in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities area, and recently the school shooter, actually the church shooter at Annunciation. You used to drive right past that church all the time, so I know that particular incident sort of haunts you a little bit. What did you, when you found out about the shooting at Annunciation, what went through your mind?
Well, first of all, it's great to see you again. Yeah, well, first of all, anytime there's any kind of shooting, my heart goes out to the families and whatnot. But like this one, it hit so close to home because not only was it in Minneapolis, but it literally was on the exact same street that my late husband, Woody, and I used to live on West 54th Street. And so I went by that church school every single day to get to the freeway to go to work. It's right by the grocery store that I went to, the Starbucks, etc. So it felt like it was my own backyard, and it was my own backyard. And to know that I've had friends and their kids have gone to that same school and church, it like literally tore me apart because, again, like I said, all shootings, but this one. And then it's just like I keep saying, every time there's another shooting, here we go again, here we go again. And it's one of those things that we just never get to the question that I really want to see asked, which is, were there any medications involved? We always go to the guns. So
right.
That's,
yes. In the wake of Charlie Kirk's death, Charlie Kirk was a big Oregon Ducks fan, and the Oregon Ducks coach came out and said, look, people just jump to, it's the guns. And then the other side jumps to mental illness. He said, what about both? What if we just look at both? And I thought it was a really sensible reaction and suggestion. Let's remind people that your husband took his own life, and you still believe that it was the Zoloft that made him suicidal. Why don't you give people who aren't familiar, Kim, with your story, sort of the brief on that?
Sure. Well, I always call myself the accidental advocate because I'm doing drug safety work for almost 22 years. So on August 6, 2003, so 22 years ago, I got a call that literally changed my life. My husband of almost 10 years was found dead hanging from the rafters. 5 weeks earlier, he had just gotten put on an antidepressant, Zoloft, for insomnia. And Woody had no history of depression. He had just started his dream job with a startup company and having trouble sleeping. And the doctor gave him a prescription, or actually samples to start with, and said this would take the edge off and help him sleep. I was out of the country the first 3 weeks he was on the drug. It was our busy time of in advertising. And I come home, and I'll never forget Wood's telling me his head's outside his body. He's like, you got to help me. I don't know what's happening to me. Bawling. We calm him down. He calls the doctor, and the doctor says you got to give the drug 4 to 6 weeks to kick in. Every night the last week of his life, what do you think about acupuncture, hypnosis? So the night that he was found, I was out of town. I hadn't heard from him, so I asked my dad to go check on our at our house because I'm like thinking Woody's had trouble sleeping. Maybe he hit his head. This was the last thing that I ever would have thought. And so that night, when I was in Detroit trying to figure out how to get home, the coroner asked a simple question: was Woody taking any medication? And the only medication he was on was Zoloft. And she said, we're going to take it with us. It might have something to do with his death. So that was that night in 2003. Also, that same day, the front page of our newspaper, the Star Tribune, had an article that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide in teens. And so literally that became our mission to go get warnings. And so I was super involved back in 2004 and 2006 to get black box suicide warnings added to these drugs. I also had a big wrongful death failure to warn lawsuit against Pfizer, and it was covered nonstop in magazines, the media around the country, and it was a very instrumental lawsuit because part of one of the things that we were able to do is get out of under seal all these documents that have shown that the FDA has and the companies have long been aware of the link between antidepressants with suicide and violence. And even more, when this all happened, I had no history of any, of the mental health drugs or anything because Wood had no history of it. But when we found out that the FDA, or that, the front page of the newspaper, had Zoloft and suicide, and the coroner said she wanted to take it with us, we Googled Zoloft and suicide and learned that the FDA had hearings in 1991 on the emergence of violence, suicide with Prozac. And at that time, every one of those advisory board members had financial ties to companies that made antidepressant products. So they all went, nope, we don't see anything. And fast forward, now you have Zoloft, Paxil on the market and for kids. And so that, that's really the backstory, and also why, like to you, what you were just saying about the Oregon Ducks, why can't it be both and?
Why can't we look at, two things can be true.
Yeah.
Two things can be true. It doesn't have to be one or the other. We don't have to get stuck in our corners. And if we really do give a damn, we will come together and find the answers.
Yeah.
So where are we today? Here we are in 2025. You've been working on this for over 2 decades. And I wonder, so it seems to me you were thinking that this person who took the lives of those 2 angels at Annunciation, there might have been a history of drug use, whether it was one of these antidepressants. There might not have been, but It is a worthwhile question. And so for people who are maybe taking these medications now, or who have a loved one who is, what kinds of questions should they be asking themselves or their doctors?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's a long history. And so a lot of people, and you were just saying, where are we today? I think in some ways it's gotten worse because there's more and more people that are taking these medications that have no idea the history. And so the most serious times when you first get put on it, are when you the risk of suicide and even violence and some of those hallucinations that head outside the body. It's a side effect called akathisia, where a lot of people, which is the precursor that even Pfizer in their own words said that if a patient gets akathisia, quote unquote, death can be a welcome result. And death can be, violent thoughts and suicidal thoughts, etc. And that was that head outside the body, or if you're seeing your loved one and they're constantly moving, you should be aware of it. But I also think there's this simple question if the doctor is recommending that your kid goes on these drugs. And it's one of the things that I am concerned with because, trauma is real. What happened to those kids and all those parents that saw what they did at that school, there's going to be a lot of mental health and trauma issues that are going to come out of it. And I think, if you're going to go get on these medications, you need to know first of all, should it actually be the first line of defense, right?
Right.
Should it really be? Because what they experience, these drugs are not mind erasers. They're not going to erase the traumas. They're not going to erase the sadness. They might help you, get through it, but they were never meant to be on for years.
Right.
And that's the other thing. People don't know what's the exit strategy. How do I get off of these medications?
Right, because it doesn't need to be a lifetime of that unless you have a very specific diagnosis. It seems to me that talk therapy is so important. Addressing first the mental health concerns through talk therapy and really... It's funny because when you're talking about should medication be the first response, it's a very similar thing with gender dysphoria. Every teenager goes through hell, right?
Yeah.
It's just part of the deal.
Part of being human, right?
It's part of being human. And as much as you want to help a hurting child, very often the best way to help them is to shepherd them through the pain rather than trying to mask the pain or assume that they're correct when they say, I'd be much happier if I was a boy instead of a girl, or vice versa. I think people are just looking for these easy answers, and a pill seems like a really easy answer. In some cases, it could work, but maybe not in all cases, and you're giving us very good reasons to question whether it's dosages, whether it's the actual medication, whether it's even if the medication is needed.
Right.
So how responsible are these companies being now? I mean, you won your lawsuit against Pfizer, right?
Correct.
Okay. I would have to believe that was a major wake-up call for that massive drug company, but are they as transparent as we think they are, Kim?
No, the drug companies are not, and I think in some ways what has happened now, it's gotten even worse, in terms of the protection, the companies. Of course, the company, when you say one, it was resolved, et cetera. They never would ever still say that the drug was responsible for it. Definitely. But so it's really hard, and with first of all, there's warnings on these drugs. The warnings stop at 24. There is no warning after 25. We've never had congressional investigations into any of the violence. And the companies, I'm looking at some of the documents, and I've got binders worth that I got out, that I delivered to every one of the members of Congress, the FDA, where there's also that Pfizer actually in here says we don't think fluoxetine, which was Prozac, remember that was the first one back in 91, is out of the woods yet with its association with violence and suicide. These companies have all known. Pfizer still has why were they helping create a prosecutor manual? And it's in 1993. I'm just saying, I'm a layperson, and I'm seeing these documents, and so there still is so much protection of it's not the drugs. And recently, during the Secretary Kennedy hearings, you heard all the senators, including our great senator from Minnesota, Tina Smith, who said these drugs have nothing to do with it. And so we hand-delivered a bunch, again, had a meeting with her. So I don't think the companies are being transparent. I think the FDA, and I think the Mental Health Association is still very protective of the drugs because it's a tool, right? It's the quick fix. And this is where I think families, again, going back to your question, I don't know that people are really given the full story about these medications, and to know the history of these medications.
Yeah, I don't know that you can be, because here's the thing. You like to believe that you can trust the medical profession and trust the big drug companies that have gone through the FDA or whatever for all these okays and approvals to market and sell this drug to the public. But you get handed maybe a booklet or a sheet of paper. There's so much fine print, and desperate people are like, I'm just going to trust you. And I don't have time to read the fine print. I don't understand the fine print. Just give me the drug. I'm going to give it to my kid or my husband or whomever and hope for the best. And, they cover themselves with the fine print, so that the legal recourse is very, very difficult for anyone who didn't happen to read the fine print, right?
Right. Well, and first of all, most of these medications now are generic, and so one of the things is you can't even sue a generic company. They're completely they have protection.
So if you're taking a generic form of, say, Zoloft, and something goes wrong, you can't sue that generic. Can you still sue Zoloft?
No, because the warning's out there and it's no longer. So that's the reality. It's very, very, very difficult to hold a company accountable. And I also think, to your point, there's a lot of blind trust, right?
Yeah.
Blind trust. We, the patient, we blindly trust our doctors. The doctors kind of blindly trust. The FDA did their job, and then knowing how the system works, that drug companies, they pay about half or more of the FDA's total budget it's through a prescription user fee act. And so the public doesn't realize that, like I always say, who's really in control? Is the FDA, who's their real customer? Is it the drug companies that actually pay a lot of their budget to get the drugs on the market? It's a business at the end of the day. And so that's the thing that people don't.
You're saying the FDA is a business at the end of the day?
Yeah, the
drug companies are. So,
yeah, but the drug.
Yeah, I mean, if they're accepting money from the drug companies. In other words, if the drug company is going to apply to get their drug through, they've got to pay the FDA certain fees, right?
Correct.
Is that what okay? Is that the only time that they pay them, or how does that work? How does that work? That the Federal Drug Administration, that's what FDA stands for, right?
Yep.
Or is it the Food and Drug Administration?
Food and Drug. And Drug.
It's still a government entity.
Yep.
Gets paid by Big Pharma. Immediately there's a conflict of interest.
Immediately. I always say it's the fox guarding the hen house, right? But it was really, this user fee really started during the AIDS crisis. Remember, right after the AIDS crisis, there was a lot of public pressure saying the FDA was too slow at approving the medications, life-saving, et cetera. So Congress enacted something called the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, PDUFA, and it's a must-pass legislation every 5 years. And we're just coming up on PDUFA again, which is basically the negotiations that happen between industry on what they expect and how fast they expect to have their drugs approved, and all of that negotiation happens between the FDA and the drug companies, and then it gets approved by Congress and it gets reinstated. So when you look at the budget, and I always say, that committee that I was talking about in 1991 that held the hearings, I sit on that. I just finished my third consecutive term as the consumer rep on that committee, the advisory committee. So I have seen how these user fees have really impacted getting drugs on the market. They're fast-tracked. They're using all these mechanisms that Congress has used and put in play so that the companies can get their products approved and then they can start marketing it. And so at the end of the day, I always say the FDA is just a hurdle. It's a business hurdle. for a company.
It's sort of like a rubber stamp?
Yeah, well, it has to be, because you can't, like a company, drug company can't put their product on the market until the FDA has approved it.
Right.
So it is, and you think about it, like, especially if they're using mechanisms to have, it used to think that the FDA had the gold standard of the clinical trials, the top in the world. Well, actually, a lot of the new drugs that come on the market today are using fast tracking mechanisms, which the PDUFA, the prescription user fee, has allowed and created all of these ways to get products to market for life-saving products for us, the public. But at the end of the day, is it, or is it really just a way to get a product on the market faster? And that's why I always tell people, like, this idea of blind trust and the systems blind, we all blindly trust, even our doctors. And so we have to do our research before we take a product.
It's so sad that faith and trust in these major entities, the really important entities, is dissolving before our eyes because of things that they've done. You keep thinking, oh, well, here we are, it's 2025, we're really civilized, we do our research, we've got high technology, we ought to be able to get these things done, and we should. But you're not the first person I've spoken with on this show about seeing things behind the curtain that are really life-altering and mind-changing for you. I think when we went through COVID, we learned a whole lot. So, let me, at the risk of jumping around, I do want to ask you about this whole MAHA movement and RFK Jr. and his approach to the FDA and so forth. There's been a lot of house cleaning. He's done a lot of house cleaning, which people have their hair on fire over. Like, if you're doing this much house cleaning, then all order is being lost, trusted experts are being fired. Is in your opinion, and as someone who's very close to these committees, is some of this house cleaning warranted?
Absolutely, it is warranted. I think, sitting on some of these advisory committee, and I know the one that's had a lot of controversy is the CDC, right? Mm-hmm. But when you look at who's on the committees, they're usually academics, they're researchers or scientists that have affiliations with the companies, or if they don't, if they're part of the whole medical complex, system, where even their universities, I didn't realize, I call it the spider web now because I started to connect all the dots. Every aspect of our system is controlled by the monies that have come through pharmaceutical. So I like independent. I think we need independent because, for years we've heard, oh, the FDA can't find independent, people to sit on these boards. Yeah, I'm like an independent. I don't make any money. I have no skin in the game other than I want to make sure that the voice of the public is represented, with the outcome. But I've seen where a lot of what happens with these committees, even if they don't take money, their university or their careers might be impacted by decisions. Right. So there's a lot of self-censoring of what they really would say, or it's always in favor of the industry and less about the, doing the right thing or saying that something's truly safe when you've got skin in the game. So I think the going in and cleaning house has been something that has been needed. I think we should be. I mean, there's already conflicts of interest. Let's get it out of these areas that really have impact on our everyday lives. How
Much should people understand? I'm trying to word this question without putting words in your mouth. There are lobbyist groups, there are people sitting in the Senate and throughout Congress who are lobbied and who are funded by Big Pharma. How significant of an issue is that? In other words, do you believe as an independent body that is some of the corruption that exists, the lobbying and the funding of candidates?
Oh, absolutely. I think lobbying is a huge problem. You look at the fun, even like when you start watching some of the hearings, and then you go look and see who's behind them, what kind of monies have they gotten, and what are they protecting? Are they really working for you and I, the everyday person? And I think the idea of the whole system's wrapped up in the power of the money. Even a lot of the patient advocacy groups or the disease groups that we think are actually representing the public, a lot of them they're getting funding from the pharmaceutical companies as well. And so they're in some ways the extension of marketing departments, right? So everybody's speaking the messages, the controlled messages that the companies or those in power want to have heard. It is a problem.
Yeah, people understand it is a problem.
It is and from somebody who does not, like, I've never been into politics, all of that. I keep saying, like, when I first went out to DC back in 22 years ago, and when I go out there today, it's not a red or blue issue, it's a purple for people. And so I think at the end of the day, that's where, when you start seeing it, I'm like, because the whole system's they're all in bed with each other. And at the end of the day, like, we really do need to ask the right questions, or just have an open mind and sit in the uncomfortable truth that we may not be being told everything that we thought was true.
I think we all can readily accept that now, Kim. Mm-hmm. Before I let you go, because all of your work has been motivated by the loss of your husband, Woody, what would you want people to know about him? What was he like?
Oh my gosh, well, first of all, I think he would have loved this environment that we live in today, because he loved to stir the pot. He loved to, like, argue. He was a true, like, well, to me, he was like my best friend, my husband, my person I was going to grow old with. He was funny, all of that. But I also loved that I think he'd be super proud of me, because I didn't like going out to DC, and he would be trying to get me to get involved in all these issues. So I think he would be really proud that I actually finally took it and didn't blindly trust that the world is as good as it seems. So anyways, but I think he's watching from up above and proud of this work, because I think at the end of the day, when I see all the things that are happening, just do your research. Don't blindly trust. Don't blindly trust.
It's a really sad statement, but it's a statement that is wise and should be heeded. And we remember Woody along with you. I never knew him, but I know you enough to know that he must have been one hell of a guy. And I'm sure that you miss him every single day. And I am really impressed with how you've taken it upon yourself to do this work. It is not easy work, and your binders there go to show that. So do you feel like your work is paying dividends?
Yes, I mean, there are times when I want to hit a wall, right? Hit a wall and go, why do you keep doing this? But, for the first time, I feel like people are starting to pay attention, even though I think that's one of the benefits that came out of COVID, is that people's eyes were awakened and are more willing to sit in the uncomfortable truth. And so, yeah, I finally feel like, all right, but at some point I'd like to retire from doing this work. I just wish it would all go away, but I think it's going to always need people and new people that step up and keep their eyes on what's happening out there.
Well, we've been showing you on the lower third how you can contact her and or go to the website and find out more information. Kim Witczak, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for visiting with us again.
Oh, thanks, and I appreciate having you. It's always good to see you too.
I end every podcast by saying be brave and do good, and Kim is doing both. It takes courage to go out there and sit on these panels and talk to people in DC, and she's doing good all along the way. So remember that, and we will see you next time. you can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe to the Trump Report. It's an email that brings you daily highlights from the Oval Office right to your inbox 5 days a week. Subscribe today at SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump.